Alright you guys, welcome back to yet another awesome video on the channel. As usual, we're going to go through another interesting mental disorder. This time we're going to cover it in more detail than I have in the past, because I know I have definitely talked about bipolar disorder in previous videos. This was supposed to be part 2 of a one long continuous video comparing and contrasting BPD and bipolar disorder. However, of course, in typical me fashion, it was like 33 minutes, and I said, I feel like I had to cut a lot of stuff out or not mention a lot of things, and it was still that long. Yes, that's what she said. But this video is going to be bipolar disorder in much more detail than we previously covered, and hopefully you find it interesting and helpful. So without any further ado, let's discuss a few things real quick on bipolar disorder in general, and then we can get into some of the diagnostic criteria that you all know and love. Alright, so some general things to know about bipolar disorder. First of all, it is a mood disorder. That's how it's classified in the DSM. And with this, it is kind of unique in terms of the episodic nature of the disorder. So basically, that means that it's not just about alternating back and forth between mania or hypomania and depression. It's not quite as simple as that. It's not like it's going to go in a perfect cycle every time, where it's very easy to predict and presumably treat as such. You can go from a full manic episode, which we'll cover in a second. You could go right into palmating into a major depressive episode. You could have another major depressive episode after that one, and then have a hypomanic episode, and then drop down to a depressive episode, and then go all the way up to a full manic episode. And it can go on and on and on. It's not necessarily predictable and one foot after the other, so to speak. So that is an important distinction that I don't necessarily hear or see referenced all that often or discussed much. So here I am letting you know it can be much more unpredictable and kind of all over the place than I think some people would think. Secondly, when we discuss diagnosing bipolar disorder in general, it's more thought of as terms of the manic symptoms, not the depressive ones. Because most of the major depressive symptoms are consistent with major depressive disorder. So basically, the majority of people who go into treatment who end up being diagnosed with bipolar disorder, or even BPD for that matter, they really only present with the depressive symptoms, right? I don't think too often have you ever heard of somebody going in that feels like they have tons of energy, more than usual. Their mind feels like they're racing. They have tons of great ideas and projects in their head all at the same time. They seem very disorganized and very out of focus because their mind is racing so much. But you feel very exuberant and kind of, you feel good. It's a good energy. You're bouncing off the walls, basically, not sleeping, talking very fast, your mind is racing. Well, you go to a therapist for that, right? You're going to go when you are crippled with depression. You can't get out of bed. You can't go to the store. You don't want to see your friends. So this is another common thing that we see very often is with treatment, people don't present with manic symptoms all too often, unless of course it comes in through a hospitalization or some other medical intervention due to a severe manic episode. which we'll cover in just a moment. So without any further ado, let's get started on this diagnostic criteria. So we're going to start here with Bipolar I disorder, and this is again the manic criteria, the mania criteria. And like I said, all the terms and definitions that I use in all my videos, because I try to be both entertaining, visual, and also educational and factual, all come from our handy friend, the DSM. This is the 5th edition. It is the most current edition that came out in 2013. So that's what we're using for all of our information, in case you were wondering. So the criteria for this, it has to have a full manic episode for Bipolar I disorder. Now, I just listed several of these criteria, but we'll go through them again. So a decreased need for sleep. This could be sleeping maybe 1 to 3 or 4 hours at most, and waking up full of energy, feeling like $1 million, like you slept for 20 hours instead of maybe 1, or maybe not even at all. You pull an all-nighter. And again, this is obviously, all of these criteria are not the normal or typical expected behavior for you. So that is kind of what we're looking at in terms of rating these. So we have that decreased need for sleep. We have an increased sense of self-esteem or grandiosity, perhaps thinking that you are better than other people at your job or some hobby. Just feeling really self-important. Perhaps not to a level of like a narcissist, of course, but just more so than usual. We also have a rapid speech pattern, just talking much faster than normal, or feeling like you need to talk more. Perhaps you interject yourself in conversations, make a bunch of jokes, something like that. And part of the reason that you are talking faster and you're processing things faster is because you basically have a flight of ideas, is kind of how it's phrased in the DSM, basically racing thoughts. Your mind is kind of spitting out information a lot faster, it's processing a lot faster, and therefore you talk faster as a result. You also have an increased level of activity when it comes to completing goal-oriented or goal-directed activities. So what this basically means, it could be, say, your work production, your tasks at work, you're able to complete them faster, more of them, more sophisticated ones perhaps, or easier, take less time. So it can be anything in terms of like work production. It could also be around the house. Say you are planning on painting maybe one room of your house, but you decide now that your mind is racing, then would be a good time to paint the entire house and remodel the kitchen tile and replace the bathroom sink and just do all sorts of maintenance and planning, because your mind is racing. You're thinking of all these great ideas, these very grandiose ideas, and how to fulfill them. But the biggest thing with the diagnostic criteria for bipolar I and for a full manic episode is going to be psychosis. This is, again, specific to this criteria for the full manic episode, and this is often considered the most dangerous, potentially dangerous symptom. And that's because, of course, psychotic behavior, hallucinations and delusions can be very dangerous. People who believe that, say, they can fly off of a building, jump and fly off of a building or some structure. People who think that they can stop a bullet with their body or dodge a car or some bus with their body. These are some things that have actually occurred. People have unfortunately actually engaged in said behaviors. Just some examples that I actually have heard or read of. which of course is very tragic. But that is why this is usually the symptom that results in immediate medical intervention, and of course also revolves around hospitalization, generally speaking. And in terms of being diagnosed with bipolar I, part of the diagnostic criteria in the DSM states for all of these criteria, but a stipulation says that if there is ever a instance of hospitalization of any duration, any length of time in the hospital for these symptoms, especially the psychosis, automatically leads to a diagnosis. It's a red hot target right on this diagnosis for any length of hospitalization because of these symptoms. So moving on to bipolar II disorder, which again is often thought to be the less severe version, although I don't really like that phrase, as I hopefully established by now, because it certainly is still severe. It still impacts me and my work production and things that I do daily. So I don't necessarily agree with the label of saying that it's just less severe, it's not as bad, don't worry about it, it's whatever. I don't like that kind of attitude. I prefer to say that it is less self-damaging in some sense, but then again, not necessarily. So for bipolar II disorder, this has hypomanic episodes. Again, the less severe version of the full manic episode that we just discussed. And you'll see that most of this criteria is actually exactly the same. The decreased need for sleep, the increased self-esteem. Now, I crossed out the grandiosity, mostly because I really don't ever read anything in research or my personal experience. I don't ever really experience feeling that I'm more important or better than anyone in any real sense. Just in general, every day, I am not that way. And that doesn't change when I am hypomanic. So perhaps for some people it's still there. It's still listed as a criteria, so I kept it. But I kind of crossed it out because it's really one that I don't necessarily see. But we still have the rapid speech. We still have the racing thoughts, the distractibility, bouncing from topic to topic very quickly. And again, we still have the increased goal-directed activities, so work production, general life production, things like that. But notice that we do not see psychosis as a criteria, because again, that is exclusive to bipolar I automatically. So now that we've discussed the manic and hypomanic criteria, let's move on to something that has a little bit more in common between the two. That's going to be the major depressive episodes. So, major depressive episodes. These symptoms are much more universal between the two forms of bipolar disorder. So, what do we see with this? We're going to see an intense sadness or feeling hopeless. We're going to see anhedonia. The fun little word that the DSM uses. Essentially, it is a loss of pleasure. Now, it's not necessarily a loss of pleasure in terms of living. It's not really like I don't want to live anymore kind of loss of pleasure. But it's more so directed at things and activities and hobbies that you used to enjoy when you weren't in this episode. So if you watch a lot of TV, play a lot of games, listen to music, hang out with friends or get out of the house, try to be social. Obviously, when you are not feeling like any of those are worth your time, you can't possibly be bothered to practice an instrument or play a video game, whatever it may be, see friends, get out of the house, you kind of isolate. That is the anhedonia. We also have feeling guilty or worthless in general. And something about this feeling guilty part, I do want to mention this because this, between BPD, but I guess also with bipolar, because I have comorbid diagnosis for both, which is fairly prevalent. One of the things I find, I am an incredibly apologetic person. I'm going to kind of go off video for a second, but I am incredibly apologetic. My friends will probably tell you that I feel like I'm more of a Canadian or a British person than an American because I apologize so damn much. It's ridiculous, right? And the problem is I've been made aware of it for so long, but yet it's still an issue most days. And it's not even like I necessarily can explain why all the time. I just feel like sometimes I feel like just like a bad friend. I feel like I don't offer the same amount of giving to the friendship or the relationship as maybe my friends do. I feel like a burden sometimes when my anxiety and depression and panic attacks are all creeping up. That fear of abandonment really leads in. I'm afraid that I'm just going to be too much and they're just going to kind of stop talking to me kind of thing. But one thing about that feeling guilty and worthless really stands out to me in particular for something I experience all the time. And a lot of people always try to ask me why. They say, why are you sorry? Why do you feel guilty? Like, don't feel bad. You can't control it. It's not your fault. There's something about knowing that it's not my fault. Knowing that I don't necessarily have control of the situation. Acknowledging that and having people constantly point that out and try to put that in your face. Now, I'm not slamming anybody of my friends or anyone who does this, but this is something that I am trying to kind of explore a bit. But I feel guilty, I guess, a lot of it because I know that I can't necessarily control my emotions. I can't control the mood swings and how I feel a lot of the time. And so I apologize constantly for my reactions to things, to if I think that I send a text message or a message of any sort and I read it back and I'm like, that sounds so aggressive. That sounds like I'm angry. That sounds like I'm just fucking depressed. They're going to get mad at me. They're going to think that I'm insulting them or that I'm saying something bad about them. They're going to get mad at me. They're going to stop talking to me. The last thing I want is one of my friends upset at me for something. So I will just apologize automatically to try to diffuse the situation and say, I'm sorry if this reads really bad. I feel horrible. The little frowny face emoji. My phone basically auto corrects to that. Like, it automatically fills that frowny smiley face in, because that's basically constantly how I feel. Like, please don't leave me. Please don't be mad at me. So that feeling guilty thing can be very, very powerful and persist a lot. But anyway, back on topic. Another thing we see is sleeping kind of disturbances. This can either be sleeping more or less than usual. We're also going to see here agitation and anger more than usual. The change in appetite more or less than usual. A loss of energy, feeling very lethargic, slow moving, slower talking perhaps. Mostly it's kind of the opposite of the racing thoughts that your manic episode produced. The brain's kind of slowing down. So you take more time to process things. You might take longer to complete things, and talking might be a little bit slower. We also see difficulty concentrating and remembering details, and thoughts of dying or suicidal ideation. So now that we covered all the depressive symptoms, what do I think about comparing bipolar and BPD? First of all, like I said before, bipolar disorder is a mood disorder. BPD, as the name would suggest, is a personality disorder. It's a cluster B personality disorder, which is kind of the emotional, erratic, and eccentric cluster. We see other personality disorders in that cluster, narcissistic personality disorder, antisocial personality disorder, and a few more. There's two more. But we're not going to go into them. That's not really important. But they are classified specifically as a personality disorder. So the biggest difference, because bipolar is actually often, well, I should say BPD is often misdiagnosed for bipolar disorder. The biggest thing is the mood swings. Generally speaking, they look pretty damn similar to each other in terms of the depressive and kind of the higher mood, the higher, more positive mood, right? The biggest way to kind of determine which is which is to really look at the duration of the mood swings, of the mood episodes, right? So with bipolar, the biggest way to think of bipolar is very, very episodic, right? Like I said in the beginning of the video, it doesn't have to necessarily be a set pattern of you're going to be very depressed, and then you're going to be very hypomanic, and then you're going to be fully manic, and then you'll crash back to the depression, and you'll climb back up and fall back down. It doesn't really work that way. It can work that way for some people, but in the majority of cases, it is a lot more random and a lot more unpredictable than just constantly crashing and going back up, walking up the stairs, going back down the stairs, up the stairs, down the stairs, that kind of analogy. It can be all over the place. Like I said, you can start with a hypomanic episode and crash to a depressive episode, and then go all the way to a full manic episode, and then crash, and then go to a full manic episode again, and then maybe have another full manic episode again, and then crash into hypomania. There's a million combinations. That's just an example. It can really be that sporadic and unpredictable. And that's what makes treatment and medication so important. So it's very episodic, right? But really, the idea is in between these episodes for bipolar, there is some form of an emotional baseline. It might waver a bit, but it's a little bit more stable, right? Stability is really the key word in treatment of bipolar disorder. You're trying to get somewhere in between these two extremes. You're trying to have more stability. That's why even some of the medications that are used to treat bipolar disorder are actually called mood stabilizers, including the one I'm actually on now, gabapentin. It's technically an anti-seizure medication, but it also has mood stabilizing effects. So currently that's what I'm on, in case anyone's wondering. So really, again, it is very episodic, but at some point in between episodes, there's supposed to be some form of baseline that you return to. When we look at BPD mood swings, there really isn't much of a baseline because everything is kind of being all over the place all the time. And another thing, as I mentioned with the bipolar before, is that it is a mood disorder. It is a chemical imbalance in the brain. So therefore, it really isn't quite as responsive to external stimuli, whereas BPD, the exact opposite. The whole fear of abandonment and rejection, when you combine that with the other criteria, the biggest one I think for this example would be kind of the idealization and devaluation cycle, right? That love-hate cycle we talked about before, where if you're my friend and you're texting me, we talk every now and again, we try to make plans to see each other, things go through, things are smooth, everything's good. I idealize you. You're a great friend. I can say nothing bad about you. You've always been there. You're phenomenal. You put up with me. You're great, right? Everything's good. But if you don't text me back when you say you're going to, if you cancel plans, anything like that, all of a sudden you do a 180 in my book, right? All of a sudden you must be like a horrible friend. You must hate me. You must be tired of me. You know, I'm too much for you to deal with. You know, you just don't care anymore. you're going to leave me. Now I can't stand you. Now I absolutely have devalued you. You are all the good things that you might have done in the past. All the times you were there for me, you texted me, you got me through things, doesn't matter anymore. You canceled on me, or you haven't talked to me in a while. Something must be wrong. You must be tired of me. This is it. You're going to leave me. So automatically, you're no good anymore. And like I said, even all the good things that might have happened in the past, well, they're buried in the past. Like, I got a shovel and I buried them in the past. That's how intense it is. And so that very, very quickly changes, right? That can change within minutes, maybe an hour at most. Very quick durations of this devaluation and idealization cycle. And even outside of just devaluing and idealizing people, but even just in general, the mood swings are they're very quick, but there's not really this return to baseline that we see with bipolar disorder. So that's really the two differences. That's really kind of how to conceptualize the two separately and how to kind of pick them apart. Now, in my case, I have comorbid disorder, so I have both. I'm diagnosed with, which is fairly common statistically. So it's not unheard of to have both. So I hope you enjoyed this video on bipolar disorder in detail. And hopefully it was very informative and you learned something. If you did learn something, found it interesting, please leave a comment below about what you liked about the video, as well as any other topics you'd like to see in the future. And if you like the video format, the new brighter background, etc., let me know in the comments, and like the video if you found it interesting or helpful, and check out the channel for more videos just like this. Now, real quick, if you are looking for a different format with the same sort of information from me, you can check out my podcast that I just started down below in the video description. It's pretty cool. I haven't done any of this sort of thing like this before, but as much as I love the video editing and all the green screen effects and all of that, there is something to be said about just being able to talk a little bit more freely without following the guides of the video format. So it is something worth checking out if you're interested in a different kind of format for the same topics that I cover here on the channel. And I also have the new Instagram link that I will also put down below in the description as well, where you can keep up to date with new channel news when I post things. I figured it was an easy way to follow a lot of other mental health pages that I already follow on Instagram on my main account. This way I can help spread my content to more people. So you can check out that again. Perhaps you'll even get a few sneak peeks of, maybe my video setup, and just other sort of interesting things that I might post as I see them. But until then, I will see you guys in the next video. Adios.